Hello folks, this is intended to be a short little video to demonstrate how I disassembled the rear shocks for the little Yamaha YL1. Someone asked me how to get the shocks apart, and I'd reacquaint myself with the process because it's been probably close to a year since I did this. So anyway, we're going to talk through how to get the shocks apart. There's really two major components to it. One is collapsing the spring, and this is an original Yamaha YL1 shock, and first thing you need to do is collapse this spring so you can get at the mounting up here at the top of the shock. So first is collapsing the spring, and the second major component is spinning off this top mounting boss. Both of those are easier said than done, and can be tricky to do. Let's start with the spring itself, collapsing of the spring. And I need to provide a warning here. Springs are a form of stored energy, and they're nothing to mess with. You can hurt yourself pretty badly on springs because of the stored energy that they contain, even on a relatively small spring like this. So you need to be careful, and if you're not comfortable, don't do it. But what I did is I collapsed the spring, and you can buy commercially made spring compressors for motorcycles. I made a spring compressor for my Kawasaki H2 Triple a number of years ago. That won't fit on the spring because the space between the coils here is too small. And so I had to come up with an alternative. So what I did is I took a large steel bar and put it through this bottom shock mount hole. If you try to use a screwdriver, it better be a big one because you're going to be pulling against that bar to collapse the shock. And I think, if I recall, I used a 1/2 or 3/4 inch bar stock. It's got to be beefy. What I did is I took two ratchet straps, the fabric type of ratchet straps, and looped them up through as far as I could, the topmost coil that I could get the ratchet strap around, and I looped it through like that. So I had a large bar at the bottom, and I hooked the ratchet strap on each side. I had two of them, two ratchet straps, one on each side. I hooked it, ran it up, looped it through around the top or the highest coil I could get it around, and back down on both sides. That would allow me then to ratchet on each side equally and collapse this spring by ratcheting down. That's a little tricky to do, but it can be done because I did it. The smaller the ratchet straps, the easier it's going to be, obviously. Once you collapse this spring so that you can get access to the very top of the shock absorber, and let's take a look at the one I actually worked on. What you have to do is you have to get access to this shaft because you have to lock that shaft to prevent it from turning. And again, that's easier said than done. So what I did is I collapsed the spring enough that I could get a pair of locking type vice grip pliers and get it on the very top of the shaft right here below this squared off round stop plate that's up underneath here. That's why you got to collapse the spring, so you can get at that shaft. And I locked it with the locking pliers like that. I then took a hot air gun and heated around here evenly, so that I got this top shock mount good and hot. And then I took a large screwdriver, put it through this top boss, and spun that top mount off. That is a threaded fitting, like you can see there. Again, that was easier said than done because this was very tight on there. In other words, after 50 some odd years, getting this free from this threaded nut may not be easy. Your mileage may vary on your project, I don't know, but I had to really clamp these vice grip's tight. Heat this and then spun it off. Once you've got this top mount boss off, you can pop this washer off, release the pliers like that. You do not have to remove this stop plate. You can, and that is in fact threaded on too, as you can see there. It does not have to come off because this is actually one of the original springs. I had it re-chromed. That spring will fit right over the top like that. So you do not have to remove this stop plate. All you have to do is remove this, thread it off, remove the washer, and then you can get the spring off. Again, let me repeat the steps. You have to collapse the spring. I used ratchet straps with a big bar through the bottom to pull against. Take your time. If you're not comfortable, don't do it. I don't want anyone hurting themselves. I can't be responsible if something goes wrong in your situation. Collapse the spring. I found locking the bar, there's really no other way to do it that I could come up with. Lock the bar, heat, let me put this back on, heat this good so it gets good and hot and it expands. Take a big screwdriver and then spin this off. And don't burn yourself in the process because this will be hot. Then you can go ahead and take it apart and you have your spring off. And obviously assembly would be basically the reverse of what we just did. That's how I went about removing the springs. I actually did both my rear shocks. This just happens to be one of them. This is a spare from a second set. That's the process I use to get them apart. Again, it is a little bit destructive because it does, when you clamp down on that upper shaft right there, it is going to mar it up a little bit. But I couldn't come up with any other viable alternative to preventing this shaft from spinning. You will note that on the top of the shaft there is a slot that was probably used during manufacturing to hold a screwdriver, something like that for some purpose. Well, you can't get at it. I was going to say, I can assure you, you're not going to hold that shaft with that screwdriver slot, but you certainly won't when it's together because you can't get at it. That slot in the end of that shaft is hidden anyway and covered by the upper mount. So it must have been used for manufacturing purposes when it was put together and made. And as you can see, this shock is, well, there's nothing left of it. There's no fluid in here anymore. It simply would be now, if I use this shock, it would be for decorative purposes only. It's not a usable shock. Anyway, that's the steps I use to disassemble the shock. I hope that's helpful for folks. And as usual, thanks for watching.